Welcome to another program in our series, DFL Senior Roundtable. I'm delighted today to have so many people with us at the roundtable, but number one, Senator Ron Latz.
Thank you, Bill. Good to be here.
Thank you for agreeing to be our special guest today. And would you care to give us a session review? The legislative session had some problems with it.
Well, we accomplished a number of important things, but yes, there are a few things we didn't quite finish up. So we had a very packed 10 weeks of the legislative session this year. We started in early March, finished by our constitutional deadline when midnight struck on May 23rd. And that was the best that we could do. We fit a lot of important things in, but some things we didn't quite get finished. So let me tell you what we did do. Most importantly that we did accomplish was a supplemental budget bill.
Good.
And in that supplemental budget, we had the benefit this year of having a structurally balanced budget that the Democrats had put into place a number of years ago, so that when the economy was doing better, we hadn't borrowed and didn't have to refill single pots of money that we'd taken money from. We didn't have to do any shifts or borrowing or anything like that. We had a straight surplus, and we had the benefit and the luxury of deciding what to do with that surplus. The Democrats' goal was to return some of that in the form of reduced taxes or refunds to the taxpayers, and to make supplemental appropriations to areas of greatest need in Minnesota. And that included areas like transportation, public safety, the Department of Corrections, some human services funding, and we did that. We passed a budget that, for example, put some more money into public safety initiatives, because I chair the Judiciary Committee, so I'm most familiar with those initiatives to help with more chemical dependency treatments, mental health treatment, for example, some transitional funding for offenders who are returning to the community, help them be successful when they return to the community. We're able to deal with some of the community housing issues as well with additional funding. So we passed a good supplemental budget. What we had on the table toward the very end of session was a transportation package which was blended into a bonding bill because we couldn't get an agreement with the House on a standalone long-term transportation package.
Putting transportation and bonding in one bill?
Well, it's not the way it should work.
No.
But we couldn't reach an agreement for long-term transportation funding. There is agreement that we need $600 million per year for the next 10 years to be able to maintain our existing transportation infrastructure. And we didn't want to do that with one-time money. We wanted to have an ongoing revenue source that we could do that with. We couldn't reach an agreement with the House Republican majority on what to do. So the final package got blended into a bonding bill with one-time cash going in, about $300 million in one-time cash for transportation projects. Then the bonding bill itself had investments in a number of places around the state, including in our higher education system, including, as I said, some of the transportation initiatives, some water transportation, water transport in southern Minnesota, and a variety of other areas. Unfortunately, what it did not include, from my perspective, my number one legislative priority was funding for light rail transit. Ongoing funding for light rail transit, but most importantly, at least a one-time infusion of funds for Southwest LRT. We needed to get $900 million of federal money cut loose by our $135 million state share, and we couldn't even get that done.
Oh.
So that's the part that hung us up at the very end. My amendment to a bonding bill that came over from the House that almost no one had seen because the House put it together so last minute.
And it had a lot of errors in it, too.
It had a lot of errors, including the fact that for a $1 billion bonding bill, it only appropriated $1 million of bonds, which was an error.
Yeah.
But that's what happens when you crush everything at the last minute because they couldn't manage their time very well. And it didn't have any ongoing funding for transit.
And the House adjourned early, didn't it? 15 minutes
Yeah,
early?
well, they adjourned.
Just so they couldn't get, so you didn't have a way to send something back
Well,
to them.
you've got it right. There was either a solid agreement to include funding that would allow Hennepin County to raise its own money to pay for Southwest LRT and ongoing transit. And the amendment was handed to Speaker Doubt by Majority Leader Bach from the Senate. And we believe they had an agreement, but at the very least, Doubt did not express any reservations about it in that meeting. We expected it to be in the bonding bill when it came over from the House. The House unveiled their bonding bill, $1 billion plus worth of projects, with about 45 minutes to go in the legislative session.
How can you read a bill?
You can't. You can't. And the House Democrats were caucusing in the hallway outside of House chambers for 10 minutes trying to review this bonding package. And then they were cut short, told they had to come in because the votes were already going up on the board. So the bonding bill got sent from the House over to us. We still didn't know if it had this transit piece in it or not. So I sat in the back of the Senate chambers with the Senate counsel, looking through the bill electronically, doing a search for the statutory section that we thought was going to be in there, and then doing a word search also. We couldn't find it anywhere. So we had a piece of paper with a photocopy of that statutory provision in it, had made the change by hand, changing a 10 to a 20, lifting the cap on all counties that are not right now allowed to raise much money on their own, from 10% to 20% their contribution they could make to transit. We handed that in at the desk. We had a voice vote on that. It passed. There was a call for division. People stood up. It passed. And we sent it over immediately, passing the full bonding package, now with funding for light rail transit in it, back to the House. The bill left the desk, the front of the Senate, and actually arrived at the House, at their chief clerk's desk, at 11:54 p.m., 6 minutes before the Constitution required them to adjourn. So they had time, had they wished to take up that bill and to pass it. Instead, they chose not to do that at 11:56 p.m. 2 minutes later, with 4 minutes left in the session, they adjourned. So they adjourned early and refused to take up this bonding transportation package. Then, of course, they want to blame the Democrats in the Senate for this.
I'd blame the Republicans.
I would blame the Republicans for prioritizing. They'd rather kill the entire bonding bill, which they did, rather than allow Hennepin County to raise its own money to pay for its own metro area transit.
Outrageous.
And so the Republicans killed these bonding projects all around the state, in their districts and in other districts, because they hate rail so much, or at least their leadership seems to. The irony on this is that the coalition of chambers of commerce around the state support long-term light rail transit funding, including Southwest LRT, and not just the Twin West Chamber.
The Chamber of Commerce supporting it, and yet they don't listen.
The business community supports it. All the communities along Southwest LRT rail line, including in Eden Prairie, which is represented by Senator David Han, the Republican minority leader in the Senate, Representative Jennifer Loon, who's a Republican in the House. And they have been opposing LRT funding from day one. And surveys of their community show that it's got 70+% support among their constituents.
And the Chamber of Commerce.
And the Chamber of Commerce, the business community in Eden Prairie supports it. And we just can't even get their votes in support of it.
Amazing.
It's surprising to me.
It's hard to call them representatives.
Well, they're certainly not following the wishes of their community on that issue. But that's what hung up the final bonding bill in the end, was funding for metro area light rail transit. And we can certainly go into more detail on the merits of that proposal if time permits here today. But I will say also, the tax bill was passed by both House and Senate. Unfortunately, it was another rush job at the end, and the rush job caused an error, an inadvertent error. I don't think there's anyone intending to do this.
So the governor did not sign
The
it.
governor did not sign it.
Hooray.
There were two problems with it. One is it cut $800,000 out of the Minnesota State High School League, which they use to fund low-income kids who need the extra subsidy to be able to afford to participate in state high school sports. Out of retribution is my belief and the governor's belief over the State High School League's position that they took on bathroom access for transgender students.
You take it out on the low-income kids.
That's what they did. And secondly, there was a $100 million error where they had a word.
How could that be?
Well, they should have had the word "and" in there, and instead they had the word "or" in a list of criteria to qualify for an additional tax exemption on charitable gaming.
Wow.
And with that error, it meant you only had to meet one of the 4 criteria instead of all of the 4 criteria. And so $100 million worth of tax changes would have happened there, and the bill would have been completely out of balance.
It
So-
gives me the impression that leadership in the House was just anti-government.
Well, either that or really sloppy, but either way is inexcusable because they couldn't make decisions, they couldn't reach agreements with the Senate far enough in advance, even to allow the nonpartisan staff to process these bills properly. So the governor, I think, had no choice but to veto
Right.
that tax bill as well.
Yeah.
And now we have to go back and fix that error as well.
And within the other half of June, we're June 15 now, but you got to get it done by the end of the month, don't you?
Well, there's no deadline for getting it done.
Oh, I thought there was.
There'd be a great advantage, especially with the tax bill, because once the new fiscal year begins July 1, and the tax changes would take effect that time, that
that's
would
what-
give us more
yeah.
lead time to prepare, or the Department of Revenue more lead time to prepare
And they need that.
for tax returns for the next cycle.
Yeah.
So they need that extra lead time. But, I mean, there's nothing constitutionally that requires us to go back and pass any of these. The only constitutional obligation we have is to balance the budget. And because we had a surplus this year, we didn't even have to pass a budget bill. We could have done nothing constitutionally. Now, as far as making progress as a state,
Well,
doing
yeah.
nothing is no option.
That's
These
what
are
we
things we all
send-
have to do.
That's why we elect you guys.
That's right.
Make progress.
That's right.
Get the state in better shape.
Well, one of the big conclusions, I think, is that the divided government right now is just not working. From
Oh.
my perspective, the House has just been so intransigent,
Yes.
unwilling to compromise, unwilling to meet the Senate in the middle or the governor in the middle on these negotiations that are going on. And as a result, we end up with nothing. And I think we need to have a unified government again.
Yes.
We got a Democratic governor. I'm confident we'll have a Democratic Senate. We need to have a Democratic House that we can work together with.
Yes. Are there any other accomplishments or frustrations that you want to speak of?
Well, a lot of both, but I'll just highlight a couple of things that I think we did that I had a direct role in since I'm on your program here today.
Right.
We passed landmark drug sentencing reform,
Great.
which has been the biggest change in 27 years, which will have the effect of treating addicts like addicts and give them an opportunity to stay out of prison or in certain circumstances to get out of prison earlier when their main crime was being an addict, even if they were doing some selling to feed their habit, rather than doing it really for economic reasons as a business. And then, also importantly, treating dealers like dealers. The ones who are dealing because they want to make money at it and because they don't care about our communities, they should go away for a long time.
Yeah.
So what we did is we added a kingpin provision, harsher penalties for dealers, especially at the highest quantities. And we reduced some of the sentences for those who are first-time offenders, even with a little bit higher quantities, but who were clearly doing it because they were feeding their own addiction and the addiction of maybe a few people around them. And we found ways to avoid automatic prison time for others as well. This will have a number of benefits. One is it's going to save a lot of money. It's going to save a lot of lives, I think, because people
Yes.
are going to get treatment instead of being just thrown away into the prison system where 80% of the people there need treatment and we don't have the resources to provide them with treatment.
And even after they get out, they have difficulty getting a job, renting an apartment, so many difficulties with that felon label on them.
Right, and one of the provisions we have will enable them to avoid that felony conviction. It mandates stays of adjudication for first-time fifth-degree drug offenders, which is a felony. With a stay of adjudication, the conviction doesn't go on their record as long as they comply with the conditions, like no more offenses.
Good.
And it creates some gross misdemeanor levels out of what were felonies in the past. It will save about 700 prison beds, which will save us a lot of money down the road.
Yeah, that we don't need to rent from a private prison.
Yeah, we won't need to go there, fortunately. And we are able to use some of the savings to put into treatment and into transitional housing and beef up our community corrections probation system as well to, again, help folks transition into the community successfully.
Now, I want to recognize not everybody at the table has to agree with me. So speak your mind when we have the opportunity. Is there anything else you want to say before we go to questions?
Well, we did pass, for the first time ever, compensation for those who have been wrongfully convicted and incarcerated and were later exonerated for their crimes. We didn't have a statute in Minnesota to do that at all until the bill I introduced last year passed and became effective. And now this year we had the first 3 claimants, people who spent up to 5 years in prison wrongfully. The judge later determined that they were not guilty. They should be plenty of proof of their innocence, and we compensated them for that. So we did some pretty good things this year.
And it certainly gives an incentive for the attorneys not to send them away.
Well, that's the message. The message is some people belong in prison. They need to go to prison, and some of them for a good long time. Not everyone under current law needs to go to prison. They really deserve an opportunity to stay out of prison, especially on first-time offenses, and we give them that chance.
Good. Anything else?
No, I'd like to hear what your folks here
Good.
have to say.
Who's got a question? Randy, I bet you have one. You're
actually,
the attorney.
It's not a question, it's a comment. One of the great principles that we learned probably in the 50s and 60s was Parkinson's Law, which is that work expands to fill available time. And I have a corollary to Parkinson's Law that relates to transportation, which is that traffic expands to congest available highways. And the most perfect example of that is a number of years ago, we were told that Highway 12 out of the western Twin Cities was unbearably congested. And the only way we could do it is create this brand new multi-lane highway called Interstate 394 out of the western Twin Cities. Well, it's probably been a decade since we've created 394, and during rush hour, it is every bit as congested as Highway 12 ever was.
So we shouldn't build these super highways.
And the only alternative to the Parkinson's Law of transportation is alternative methods of transportation, such as light rail, such as commuter rail, such as intercity rail.
Commuter bus, too.
Yeah, and it's just crazy that we aren't heeding Parkinson's Law and doing it.
What do you say?
Well, I would agree with you, Randy, and it borrows the term from physics. The gas expands to fill the space that's available for it, and that flows out into public policy as well. We already have a rail transit system for commuters, but it's fledgling. It's not built out yet. We long ago crossed the Rubicon in deciding that we were going to have a rail transit commuter system in the metro area anyway. We've got the Green Line and we've got the Blue Line. Southwest LRT is the next step. Following that will be Botno, which will come out into this area here in Brooklyn Park. And there's the Gateway Corridor in East Metro. There's talk about extending North Star commuter rail up to St. Cloud, where it should have gone in the first place. But there's a whole other political story behind why it ends in Big Lake right now. There's talk about rail connection to Rochester and high-speed rail either Rochester or Chicago. A lot of reasons for rail transit all around the system, or mass transit, including rail. And you're quite right. 394 flows better, I think, depending on which time of day you're there. The worst problem right now is on rush hour going in to downtown area because you hit the bottleneck at the tunnel. But it's certainly an issue. We need better rail system. And we need a long-term transit funding mechanism for that. I support a metro-wide half-cent sales tax increase that would help us fund Metro-wide, East and West Metro, the transit system, both the infrastructure capital investment costs as well as operational costs to keep it running. Ironically, there are those who oppose rail transit by saying there's a big public subsidy for it. The fares at the fare box don't bring in enough money to cover the costs of running it. And then they say we'd much rather have bus transit instead. Well, the fact is bus transit has more of a public subsidy than our current rail transit.
Really?
lines do. Yes, and those are Met Council's own figures on that. So it's not only more efficient, it's more cost effective to do it by rail as well. Yes, it takes a big initial investment, but you know, if I had to take a bus from Eden Prairie to downtown Minneapolis in January when there's 3 inches of snow on the ground and it's still snowing, I'd rather be on rail because I know I'm going to get there on time. If you're on a bus or in a car, it's going to take you a lot longer.
Even with the designated bus lanes.
Even with designated bus lanes, you're still going to have congestion and slippery conditions and
Oh,
clearing
yeah.
the snow that you have to deal with, and that's not nearly as much a problem with rail.
Yeah.
So Randy, I agree with you completely. We need to build it out. We need to have some kind of a long-term transit funding system like Denver has. Denver passed a transit funding mechanism, Metro-wide sales tax. They built out their entire system at one time, and they've got a comprehensive system now. We will get there, but we can't keep lurching year to year, fighting dollar for dollar for dollar piecemeal, and being unable to plan a long-term system. It'll take us 50 years to build it out, and we can't afford that. We're going to have 750,000 people, new people, moving into the metro area
Wow.
by the year 2040. We cannot build enough highways to accommodate that additional traffic.
We have to have transit.
You have
for
to
that.
have alternative transit like
Yeah.
rail.
Good. Yes.
We've got lots of things to cover other than just transportation, but I need to follow up at least with one question. I'm from Woodbury, and the Gateway is always talked about out there, and I'm just curious, why is there such vehement opposition to public transit, or is there no easy answer to that? There's extraordinarily vehement opposition in the Woodbury area to this.
Well, my guess is, Dick, is it has to do with the perception that it's expensive, it's going to cost taxes. And there is a cost to it. There's no question about it. But there's a benefit that'll last 50 or 75 or 100 years. So it's not just the people who are currently living in these neighborhoods that are going to benefit from this. You go to any other economic region around the world, any major economic region, you will find a well-run, viable rail commuter system. You go to London, you go to Paris, you go to Boston, you go to San Francisco, DC, New York, and these systems go back in some cases over 100 years, 150 years. You go to Kharkov, Ukraine, and they've got a beautiful mass transit system, underground rail system there. Yet we can't seem to build that out here, and we have more Fortune 500 companies than you can wink at. You know, we've got 19 Fortune 500 companies in the metropolitan area here.
More
and
than other cities our size.
more than any other state per capita.
Really?
And we're still growing them. We've got the University of Minnesota, we got Rochester and Mayo, which is a major destination point
Yeah.
from around the world for healthcare. You've got just a wonderful economic region here, and we are going to be stifled in our growth because we won't be able to bring in the young people who are graduating from college that have all the skills that are going to keep this economic region growing if they look around and all they see are cars stranded on concrete.
Yeah.
We're not going to be able to sustain that long term. We've got to build out a mass transit system. And you know, Woodbury, some of them are probably just listening to the naysayers that say it's too expensive, we can't afford it, we don't want to pay any more taxes. But you know what? You get what you pay for.
Yeah. But the naysayers are wrong.
In my opinion, they are, yes.
Yeah. Now, another question, Carol was asking earlier about the
Real ID.
Real ID.
Yep.
Yeah. What have you done?
Well, Real ID is required by the federal government. It was recommended by the 911 Commission, the 9/11 Commission, following the attacks in New York, as a method of ensuring that people who get identification, like driver's licenses, that get used for access to all sorts of places, including airports, which was the issue in the 9/11 attacks, federal buildings, nuclear power plants, utilities, courthouses, those kinds of things, that they be reliable. That they actually, when they say that it says Ron Latz on it, that the security at those facilities can believe that it's really me and that I'm not a terrorist, right? So there were issues. I think the state of Virginia at the time had issued a couple of driver's licenses to some of the people who got on the planes and ended up hijacking the planes for 9/11. So the federal government is requiring all the states in the country to come up with a better, stronger, more reliable system for checking that people are who they say they are when they apply for driver's licenses. Minnesota had resisted that for a number of reasons, but I think the chief reason was their concern that it was going to create a national ID card, that it was going to be the federal government coming on too heavily to identify who we are and be able to keep track of us. And I understand and respect that concern. The legislature a number of years ago passed a law saying the state of Minnesota can't even plan for real ID.
That was not a DFL legislature.
Well,
Was
it was a strong bipartisan vote
Really?
To pass that. But what's happened in that time is almost every other state has adopted it. The federal government has not backed down. Our hope was we'd send a message to the feds and they would change some of their requirements. But they didn't. And now there are only a couple of states left that have not come into compliance with this. And there's a very real possibility that at the point of the deadline, Minnesotans will not be able to get into the airport to get onto planes without having an upgraded, enhanced, more secure form of identification.
Or a passport.
Well, or a passport.
Yeah.
But a lot of people, if you don't travel internationally, you don't need a passport right
Right.
now. You can get on a plane with your driver's license, just your regular driver's license, and travel anywhere around the country. So we needed to come into compliance. That took two steps. We did pass a law early in the legislative session repealing the prohibition on planning for real ID. So the state government now can go through the planning process, can determine exactly what we need to do to come into compliance. And we had a pretty good understanding of that. And we had a bill put together, both in the House and the Senate. But there was one hang-up left, and that was a hang-up mostly over whether or not undocumented residents of Minnesota, some people call them illegal immigrants, others simply say they're undocumented workers or residents, but whatever your choice of words are, the question was, should they be able to get a driver's license? And then you get into that debate, and that's a whole nother discussion. But that piece got hung up, the final piece of the Real ID bill.
Isn't it pretty simple to have a driver's license that somehow indicates this person is not a citizen or has not documented that they are a citizen?
Well, you can, and from my own perspective, for the main purpose of a driver's license is to be able to assure that the person has the proper training and background to drive
Right.
safely on the
Yeah.
road,
Yeah.
right, for all of our own protection while we're out there. If their license is suspended because they've had a DWI or because they've been driving without valid driving privileges or they got into a car accident, didn't have insurance, those kind of things. We want to make sure they've gone through the training, have passed the test, and are able to successfully and safely drive on the road. The fact is, we also know that undocumented residents in Minnesota are driving because they're here, they need to get to work, they're taking care of their families, and we want them to get to work safely, right? We want us to get to work safely while they're on the road. So from my perspective, they ought to get a driver's license, ought to be allowed to get a driver's license, make sure that they have insurance and they can drive safely. So I would say give them a license.
What are the requirements? I mean, what is the federal government requiring for this Real ID? So I mean, what are the requirements? And then the next question or the follow-up to that is, what about people that can't get have a driver's license or don't drive, just need an ID? What do you do for that?
Well, the requirements are basically a birth certificate, a passport if you have one, or just several forms of reliable identification that shows you are who you say you are.
Okay.
A social security card, those kinds of things.
But if a woman is married, changed her name, divorced, married again.
That's a problem.
Yes.
That's a problem, and if they started out in Alabama 89 years ago, and they've moved several times, and have had several marriages along the way.
And there are a lot of undocumented births.
Yeah, and so
Too, in
tracing it all the
Alabama.
way back, it would be very difficult. That's a challenge, and that was part of the big debate over whether or not identification should be required at the polls when people are voting. A lot of seniors might not be able to provide that identification or be able to go back and get the reliable proof. So yeah, that's an issue. There are a number of alternative ways to do it that are set up in the proposals, so that most people should be able to get it. So what was the second part of your question then also?
People that don't drive, that don't
that
have a
don't drive.
driver's license, have no need for a driver's license, which we use as an ID.
Right.
What do they do, just like voter ID, you know, all
They can
this?
still get a state identification card.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. And in fact, right now, there's actually a driver's license called an enhanced DL, which people can get under current law, which does meet the requirements of Real ID. But it's only available at a limited number of locations in Minnesota. Some people like to use it to be able to cross the border easily into Canada if they go
Oh,
fishing or
okay.
travel there regularly without getting a formal passport.
Dwayne has a question.
Yes, Dwayne King, Senate District 45 in Golden Valley, and former House member, Senator Latz. And I'm here from the DFL Senior Caucus as a board member. I do have a question as well, but I wanted to point out that another board member is here, Dick Bernard, that just asked a question. And we both want to congratulate you, Bill, on helping to try to form a chapter of our senior caucus
The
here in the
Northwest
Northwest Metro
Yeah.
area, which includes the Minneapolis as well as the surrounding suburbs here. And we applaud your efforts
Thank you.
in that direction. My question, Senator Latz, is does the sentencing bill include alcohol? Because I have a family member who's a final stage chronic alcoholic, and as I well know and have learned, they withdraw into themselves. So sending them to prison is about the worst thing that can happen to them. It just isolates them further. And I'm just wondering, how is alcohol treated in your bill, or in the bill that you mentioned, I should say?
Yeah, Dwayne, and thanks for your public service as a member of the House as well. The sentencing bill that I described does not address anything relating to alcohol issues. It addresses only drugs. So heroin, marijuana, which by the way we also we added a much stronger penalty for people who carry large quantities of marijuana around for dealing as well. Oxycodone and prescription drugs that they don't have prescriptions for, those kind of things is covered. But alcohol, there were some proposals for DWI changes that actually I was carrying as well that we could not get agreement with the House on. Changes that would have allowed a person who's subject to forfeiture, for example, of their vehicle because they've had too many DWIs, to get the vehicle back if they commit to putting the ignition interlock device in that vehicle. Again, we know they're going to be out driving. They're going to buy a $500 junker so they can still drive. I'd rather they drive their own vehicle with the ignition interlock device in it, and they're safer for all of us. And there were some other DWI reforms that were in that package, and we couldn't get agreement on that. The only time a DWI offender is going to go to prison is if they commit a felony offense, and that's typically a fourth in 10 years or a fifth on record. And even then, sometimes they don't go to prison, but they might go to a county workhouse for a while. Alcohol is a real tough demon to beat. The key there is not getting behind the wheel. The problem is their judgment goes quickly, and they think they're okay to drive even when everyone else knows that they're not. So the felony DWI law is still in place, no changes to that. And I don't think there ought to be any changes to that. That was a good toughening up of the law that we passed a number of years ago. We do provide some more funding for treatment facilities in Minnesota, so hopefully there'll be more funding available for alcoholics who can get into treatment to maybe help stop drinking.
No, let me suggest that on that same subject, I think one of the dumbest things that the legislature ever did was when it adopted the felony DWI prohibition. You had to figure out a way to pay the increased costs, and the way the legislature chose to do it was to increase the license reinstatement fee, so it's nearly $700 right now. And for huge numbers of people, that's an insurmountable burden. Those people don't stop driving, they continue to drive. And so
They don't have the 700 to.
they don't have the
reinstate
700 to
their driver's
reinstate the driver's license. They keep driving anyway. We're having multiple prosecutions for driving after revocation because people can't afford it. And you've created an absolute underclass of people who are totally outside the driver's license system. And I think it had to be the dumbest way possible to fund the felony prohibition.
Randy, you're speaking of a previous legislature. You're
That's right. I'm not
you're not
talking-
speaking of Ron.
No, I can speak to that though, because I agree with Randy, certainly on the issue relating to the cost of driver's license reinstatement. It's $680 by statute plus a separate reinstatement fee whenever you apply for a new license, which takes it to about $710 total. I carried legislation successfully a number of years ago for those who qualify for the public defender to be able to split that out into a payment plan so they can pay half of it in year one and half of it in year two. I've also carried legislation to make that a more broadly available payment plan also. But you're right, it's a budget question right now in terms of reducing that. It is a real barrier for folks. We have been able to use some of the funds in the Judiciary Budget Division to be able to cut down some of the filing fees for certain things. Like, for example, this year we eliminated the filing fee for respondents in harassment restraining order proceedings. We've cut down filing fees in a number of other cases last year in the budget cycle. The access to the courts is a big issue also. But you're right about driver's licenses in particular. And one of my goals is to try to find a way to start rolling back that filing fee or that reinstatement fee. You're also quite right about the driving after withdrawal cases, driving after revocation or suspension or cancellation. People are out there driving anyway because they need to get to where they're going. It doesn't excuse it as a matter of law, but it's a practical reality. And that's why, for example, the city of Minneapolis has just announced a new program, a diversion program, to help people get their licenses back when they get caught in this trap where they get caught driving after revocation, then they get a citation, and there's a cost to deal with there, and then they can't afford to do that, and they start to pile up. The State Department of Public Safety does have a diversion program that they have available as well. I know Ramsey County does something like this too. So there are a number of people that are trying to address this. But it's a big problem. I had a public defender a number of years ago from Washington County who testified in front of the Judiciary Division that probably 40% of his cases were driving after withdrawal cases. So we need to get a better handle on that and maybe not revoke driving privileges as frequently as we do also.
I appreciate your work on that, Ron. It's important to help those people get back on the road legally, I think, in order so they can go to work.
That's the goal, and that's the goal of the Ignition Interlock program too, and we're talking about DWIs in particular, which is to get them, we know they're driving anyway, get them driving safely with this safety device in their vehicle.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Sir Ron, co-producer of Less Stress for You and I. Sir, I was wondering if you could revisit the issue once again of mass incarceration. You made claim that there are new programs being set up to avoid recidivism. This could also touch on the gentleman's issue that he was speaking on. Would you mind highlighting some of those programs that you're talking about that will aid people coming out of jail to realign with society again and become productive members?
Sure. It's a great question, and it's a very real issue because 95% offenders who are in prison right now will eventually reach the end of their term and are going to come back into our community.
Yes.
Even if they're sentenced to 18 years or 25 years, when that time is up, they're back in the community. We want them to come back and be successful, which I define as, number one, not committing any new offenses, right? We want them to be safe in our communities. And to accomplish that, there are a number of things. The most successful program to reduce long-term recidivism is a good long-term job.
Absolutely.
Number one, good long-term job. They got the income, they can take care of themselves, they can pay for their families. If they have children, they can pay for housing. Second part is getting housing.
Right.
Because it's hard for a person with a felony conviction on their record to get housing. But in terms of, and that they have adequate supervision and assistance transitioning back into the community. When you're in a prison, it's a very structured environment.
We have less than a minute left.
Oh, I'll try to be quick. Very structured environment. When they go back into an environment where they have all the freedom to make all their own decisions, it's hard, right? So we got to beef up our community correction system. We did fund the high risk revocation reduction program this year, which will help target those who are at greatest risk for reoffending when they go back in the community to reduce that. We've improved funding for the employee program, which is to give more workforce training skills so they can find and keep a job when they go back into the community as well.
Okay.
So we're doing a lot of good things there. One other thing on public safety I should mention, big accomplishment of the year, we passed the body camera legislation this
Oh,
year.
yes.
Which will set the rules out clearly so communities can
Good.
adopt body cameras for their police officers, for accountability for the police and for the residents of the community.
Senator Ron Latz, thank you so much for
Thank
being
you,
with
Bill.
us.
It's a pleasure
today.
to be here.
Thank you all.
Thank you.